I hope it was a nice lunch. Obviously, our speakers were already in the room when I introduced them over the way a moment ago as the newly formed duo. So thank you very much for coming and giving a presentation for us today. Looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. We are live streaming on our YouTube channel, and I reliably am informed that there are a handful of people watching that earlier. So if there are any questions, I ask that we use the microphone because otherwise the live streamers can't hear that. But of course, we'll get to that when we come to it. And what we will do is make sure that the live stream is published out to the membership so that you can re-watch some of the talks that we've heard today. Certainly been an awful lot of information for us all to onboard. And also we'll make any resources that have been made available to us available to the membership to review, such as slide packs, etc. So, without further ado, to give our 2025 Walker Lecture, I'd like to invite up Rita Campos and Martin Bonsoir, and the title of the talk is Eco Sound, Amplifying Sustainability in the Audio Industry. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me about the streaming just 2 seconds ago. That doesn't make me feel any nervous at all. So welcome and thank you for having us. Our intent is to have a little talk about sustainability and how is it relevant to our industry. But before we begin, I wanted to make sure that yes, we are both employed by ISCVEx, but this isn't a corporate representation. We are just going to present our personal research. We may or may not, but it's certainly not intended to be the voice of our employers. This is just information that we hope is generally useful for the industry. The other big caveat is that we have no intention to come here and preach about anything. We are not going to we are very much aware that the topic of sustainability can be controversial at times. Some people feel that there's too much information. Some of that information is a bit conflicting, and it's not always easy to find out what's good or bad. But really, we're not here to try to impose any views. That's not at all the intention. We are definitely here not trying to sell any kind of lifestyle to people. In the topic of transparency with me, I do source my toilet paper from unbleached bamboo. I have my vegetables delivered from local sources. I do have sustainable electricity in my house, but I don't drive a Prius at all, and I'm on a plane almost every week. So I do not live a sustainable eco life. That's not the intention at all. But we tried to, no matter where you are from the fence, we try to remove all sort of, ideology or even political allegiances to the topic, but rather just do the investigation. What is it really that is relevant to us as either a manufacturer or a distributor or a system integrator, and how can we apply that? So then you can use that information as your tool to hopefully be slightly more informed on the topic. And as such, then, to begin with, we've got to start defining what do we mean by sustainability.
Thank you. So, what is sustainability? I'm sure we all have a pretty good idea of what it means, but as defined by the United Nations, it consists of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And this comes in many forms. And to help guide the world towards a more sustainable future, the UN has developed these goals. There are plenty of them. Not all of them will apply to our industry. But what we tried to do was we tried to combine the ones that do apply to us, either as a company within the audio industry, or also as the industry itself. So some of these goals are number 3, 5, and 8. So number 3 has to do with, as a company, promoting good health and well-being for everyone working with and for us. Gender equality is pretty self-explanatory, I would say. So I'd say there is a chance here for companies to help promote the jobs within the industry among girls, for example, because being a woman myself, I know that we're not often told the story that we can also do these jobs, so why not tell them that as well? And there are also other points that we can contribute towards. So if we have a bigger, as a company, if we have a bigger presence worldwide, then this will involve shorter travel whenever we have to go to site, for example. We can promote the use of public transport, where possible, of course. Promote virtual meetings where possible. I very much like to be present and speak to people in person, but sometimes we know we have some meetings that, could be like a 5-minute chat, and we wouldn't need to, to travel for that really. Just phone call sometimes, video, pretty useful for that. And among other measures, such as promoting minimization of noise emissions. Then we also have, I actually forgot to talk about number 8. So that has to do with promoting decent work and a sustainable economic growth. On the next slide. So specifically as a technology manufacturer, we have goals 9 and 12. Goal 9 has to do with promoting innovation, sustainable innovation and sustainable infrastructures. And number 12 has to do with manufacturing products, equipment in a sustainable way and making sure that the consumption also happens in a sustainable way. We'll talk a bit more about it later on. And in addition to these, we have other measures, such as we can keep working on increasing the power consumption efficiency of our products. We can work on extending our products' life cycles. We can allow for our equipment to be repaired and reutilized, etc.
So now that we introduced sustainability, just want to make sure what do we mean by AV industry. We all work in that, so we hopefully know what it is. It's just a collection of companies involved with the producing of the content or the technologies, the aid, the audiovisual consumption of content. The important part was interesting is the size of it. There are different studies that have an idea or a guess of what our industry is worthwhile. Model Intelligence produced a report last year that thinks that we are going to be worth 295 billion by the year 2030. ISCVEx is more positive than that. He thinks that we're worth $422 billion. Bottom line is we're no longer this niche small company that no one pays attention to, but rather we have become a more mature industry, which does mean that suddenly we're starting to come onto the radar of regulations, and then we're starting to be much more looked into. So we are starting to be asked, are we sustainable? What kind of efforts do we make towards that? So.
Okay, so why does it matter? So, like Martin said, we're a pretty big industry, and as such, we consume a lot of energy, and we produce a lot of electronic waste. So it's good for us to start thinking about how we can help with sustainability from our side, and we can have a pretty big impact, I'd say, if we do think just a bit about how we do things. So in terms of electronics, this is just an example that starts in the 90s and goes up to 2015, as you can see. So that's just to give you an idea of how much the use of e-products and the e-waste, the number of e-waste has increased. So it's an ever-increasing trend, and Martin will show you more about this later on, but it just kept increasing, and so it's important to, at some point, take some measures to control it. also, one thing that I didn't mention is that artists are starting to worry a bit more about what kind of sound systems they use. They're trying to look for more energy efficient sound systems. We have the production companies that are starting to care a bit more about sustainable practices as well. So they're trying to have more events that are powered by renewable energies. You even have venues that are becoming more aware of this issue and they're trying to be better themselves. Like some of you, if not all, might have been to ISCVE. I didn't know this myself, but after a bit of research, I realized that ISCVE, so the Fira de Barcelona, is actually 100% running on renewable energies. I didn't know that. I found that quite impressive. And it's certainly a trend that we could try and follow ourselves where possible. Another thing that is very much used in our industry is plastic. But I think I can speak for most of us when I say that I was fed the idea that using plastic was actually all right because it's recyclable. But it turns out that it isn't. And you will all know this recycling symbol, Jesus, at the top. And what you often find in plastic containers and plastic stuff in general is that symbol below that is very similar to the recycling symbol, but that means something completely different. That is basically identifying the type of resin that said material was made of. But it does indeed look a lot like a recycling symbol. So how did this happen, potentially? So plastic is made of oil and natural gas, and as such, it emerged from existing fossil fuel corporations and the chemical industry, so it had pretty good sponsors, I'd say. And it was also a very lightweight and cheap material to produce, so it started getting used very widely, and it was just easy enough to replace. So whenever something got broken, people would just easily replace it by something else also made of plastic. Now, whether people knew what kind of problem this would create from the very start or not, that's a big question. They may not even have realized it from the start, but concerns started getting raised about the use of plastic, and at some point the industry had to deal with it. And it turned out that they found out that most plastic couldn't actually be recycled. There's only a small percentage of it that is actually recycled, and I think, is it type 1? I can't recall now, but there's only one of the types that has like the higher chance of being actually recycled. So most of it doesn't stand a chance. And that circle there just gives you an example of percentages of a percentage of plastic material that was actually recycled, which is basically 9% of 353 million tons that were produced in 2019, so pretty low. But still, it's very important for us to try to recycle, because if we don't even try it, it might not work very well, but if we don't even try it, then those 9% will likely be 0 or 1, which is even worse. So it's not good, but let's try and keep it as it is until it gets better. And there's only one more thing that I wanted to say about this. So the EU is kind of leading the way in terms of legislation regarding recycling plastic. And as you have noticed quite a while ago, they have banned certain single-use plastics such as the straws, cutlery, cotton bud sticks, etc. So something else that we use a lot in our industry are rare metals and wood. So the rare metals are used in the manufacturing process of loudspeakers. Some of the rare metals are presented there in those pictures. Martin is going to talk a bit more about this later on. But yeah, it's important to ensure that we do this in the proper way, because we're disturbing ecosystems and we're releasing very harmful pollutants into the soil, and it will eventually get to us, as you know. And there's also the topic of the wood, which is another raw material that is very much used in the industry.
Thank you. So, with that in mind, what can we actually do? Or what are we, more likely, what are we expected to do as an industry? As you mentioned, when a consultant or a company or a customer says, okay, what have you done in order to improve your sustainability? Then, of course, the most obvious and probably arguably easier thing is, like, well, we just looked at alternative materials and we tried to use more sustainable materials. Indeed, the change from plastic straws to paper ones is one of the examples. And then there are a number of different materials that we can try to find a more sustainable or less polluting more ethical material, but that's not always possible with everything. For example, if you are to make loudspeakers, some of them are going to be made of wood. And yes, there have been loads of research trying to find alternative material for some of them, but for some applications, there simply isn't another material that we have discovered that has equally good properties. So then there are some steps that can be taken, and a small example of those ones, we can work with organizations that do align to some directives to produce their raw material in more sustainable fashion. There are reforestation organizations, so therefore there is attempts that you can do to replenish the material, the raw materials that you're using. There is also specifications and or regulations that will control the use of toxic materials within the materials that you use, or there are even ISO standards. The 14001 is quite an interesting one because it's a bit of an umbrella that the company that implements this regulation within the manufacturing processes, then they are complying with almost all of the sustainable materials. So therefore, as a manufacturer or as a distributor, then you do try to align with companies that do have this accreditation. And it goes to some way. You're not replacing the material, but it goes to some way to do it in a more sustainable way as per the UN definition. Now, when it comes to rare earth materials, which are indeed used in electronics, they're used in the manufacture of magnets, it is a more difficult one because the mining of these things is potentially very polluting. The locations tend to be very remote, and usually they tend to somehow be aligned with an area or be geographically located in an area of conflict. So that's very difficult, and there is, as of yet, no technology to replace them. Something very similar happens with plastic. We can replace it to some degree, but it's very difficult to replace. And that's one, you can't replace the material, you can't do it in a more sustainable way, at least not easily, so that's when recycling comes into the picture. And as we mentioned, recycling is a difficult thing to do, or at least it's a difficult thing to police. It is certainly worth doing, and there are lots of efforts and ways in which materials can be recycled, often not just at the end of the lifespan, which is sometimes what most of us think about recycling is once you were off, then we recycle it. But even at the beginning of production, does produce a lot of waste. Before it becomes a product, then it can be recycled. And it's a way to salvage the waste of you doing the production. The caveat with recycling, and what I think that we can show the credits of how sustainable we are, is to actually follow up with the chain of recycling. As we mentioned, a lot of plastic actually ends up in landfills. A lot of the things that we dress ends up in landfill. Things that you do hand over for recycling end up being thrown away somewhere. And as recently as yesterday, the BBC reported that when we pay for our tires to be recycled, they're not being recycled, they're being burned someplace else. So it is a difficult one to do, so then the other methods tend to be a bit more effective in the sustainability, but it is necessary for at least some of them. Now, when it comes to recycling into waste management, then there are legislations that almost all of us will have to pay attention to, certainly manufacturers do. We is by far the largest one, which is in a way accompanied by Roche, which is really intended to reduce the pollutants or the toxic components to come into the chain to begin with. Because we are in the UK, of course, we don't have to pay attention to what the EU says. So what we did is we just nicked the regulations and we just copy it. So we have RE2 to do. And there's also the packaging waste regulations, which is quite an interesting one. It's a series of different things which you have to comply with. There is some... in the research, I couldn't find any specifics when it will be actually be introduced, and I do hear different comments from different countries because they're being, but very soon we are going to have to declare all of our packaging material at the point of sale, for example, and there are some countries that are determining and how much, and then there are credits and taxes they are attached to that. So we do have, those are cases where the regulations do specifically say what steps we need to take. Another strategy that we can use, and we have been using for a long time, is to use technology to make our products more sustainable. Energy Star, the introduction of Class D amplifiers, being able to use fewer and fewer resources to achieve a similar outcome are used. They are very advanced technologies. That means that you can reuse the same venues. Back when I was young, a venue will do one thing. Now almost all venues are multi-purpose. They will do an event, they will do a show, they do a sports event. It makes sense that you will reuse things, and those are all technologies that they are being developed in order to use fewer resources to achieve the same goal.
So we have collected a few ideas that we wanted to share with you, so you can, if you want, get some inspiration from them and maybe apply it to your own companies, your own jobs. So we are by no means perfect, but we're trying to do something about it. So these are some of the things that we've started doing already. So we've started using less raw materials. We are very much concerned with reducing noise pollution, and some of the technology that we implement in our equipment is targeting that as well. And we invest quite a lot of research into making our equipment more efficient. And that's about it, really. You can access this presentation after, so I'm not going to go through all of these notes, so you can have a look at them later, but it's basically that: less raw material use, increasing efficiency, and I'm going to leave you on that note.
So now the next thing that we wanted to, or what we were looking is, what's next? I mean, what are the steps? Because 10 years ago, we would not necessarily be asked about our sustainability credentials when we were selling our products or we were doing installations. We are, and we have started to, and as I mentioned, there are a few regulations, but it's very incipient, the truth. And therefore, then we're just trying to do, now looking into the future is always a bit tricky. So, and I don't have my crystal ball. It broke down last week, and I can't cycle. But we try to identify a series of different topics or aspects that we can do. Now, we can try to take action. We try to be more energy efficient, and we can even try to do carbon capture. There is people that are actually trying to remove carbon from the atmosphere and turn it into diamonds. Viable. Another strategy is to try to work towards a circular economy, and trying to reuse things and try to sell it second-hand, trying to make things last a little bit longer. There are some companies that offer extended warranties. The automotive industry is actually quite leading. You can buy a certified used car which does have a new warranty, something that we're not necessarily doing that much in our industry. Some companies are doing it, but again, incipient, but it's a way of trying to make more use out of the materials that we have already used. The attempt to try to trace where all of our materials come from is probably another area in which we can inspect, to try to find out and get traceability of where everything that we source and where it comes from. It isn't necessarily simple, it isn't always there, but the food industry has gone to great lengths to be able to do that. And now you can source a steak that you can even know what the name of the cow, where it comes from, was. We're not there in the industry, certainly not with electronics. But it is an area that we can definitely explore. The other area is that of green finance. Green finance isn't very mature in our country. There are some other countries in Europe where they do have much more sustainable banking and options. We tend to, at least in my research, we tend to not necessarily be that associated with that in our industry, mostly because a lot of the sustainable banking tends to be a lot more expensive. So of course, when we want a loan, we want the lowest possible interest rate, and sustainable bankings don't necessarily offer that. Or also be making sure that when the financial associations that we are linked with, they tend to maintain a more transparent investment portfolio, and that's definitely something that we can improve of. Of course, we are a technology industry, so therefore continue with the research to finding cleverer ways of using the technology that we have, or the materials that we have, or the products that we have in a way that's more sustainable is most definitely a way we can improve on. We can also be a lot more mindful about the impact of what we're doing that it will have in the ecosystem, in the biodiversity of the places where it comes from. And we can either take direct action to that, or at least try to force our suppliers to take a bigger interest in the impact of what they're doing. We can also work with our customers, and we can also try to educate or inform or be part of groups that means that we, in a way, and this probably coming from the manufacturer that sells products is not the best one, but we try to get people to buy less and actually use it more and use it for longer and make it much more useful, and not get into the cycle of trying to constantly go, and every 2 years you do have to buy a new phone because actually no longer works. So therefore trying to educate the market a bit more. And also we can actually admit the climate change is occurring. We can have debates of why, but trying to pretend that certain areas of the country don't flood every year is silly, because they flood every year. Maybe we miss one, but it is there. So therefore, we can then adapt and change our processes, our infrastructure, our thing, in a way that it just accepts that, yeah, this is what it is. and it is warmer now than when I was a kid. Therefore, do I need to build my house just for the cold, or can I just build it so then it actually can cope with the heat in the summer too? So there are things that we can adapt and accept. And also, and perhaps the point that actually trigger the desire to have this chat is the fact that we are no longer under the radar. We are being requested to say, what do you do about that? So I found very few examples of all of us in this industry where we are transparent about our processes and our policies. We don't speak much about it. We probably don't even know that this is a thing. And then when you go to this job and say, yes, I want to buy your product, tell me about how sustainable you are. No clue. No idea. We haven't even looked into it. So we are going to be asked. And I do think that by being more transparent, even if we are taking a plane every week and killing lots of polar bears, at least you say it, and therefore you know that you can work on something, and having a report is never a bad idea. And then in the topic of sustainability, I do feel that sometimes we do forget that the United Nations defines well-being as part of sustainability. It's not just about making sure that we don't fell any trees, it's about treating your workers properly, and to provide a nice home and work balance, and to provide them with nice conditions, the ones that work directly with you and those that surround you. And that's also a huge area that I think that we can explore and we can report, because we may already be doing things that our customers want to hear. We just don't talk about it. So, without trying to make it too long, there are quite a lot of areas about this. The conclusion is that I feel that we can no longer pretend that we are not here. We can no longer pretend that we're not being asked about this as part of the industry. As Rita mentioned, there are customers that demand this. There are venues, there are other industries that are way ahead of us on this topic. And therefore, I feel that regardless, and again, removing all of the ethical or moral connotation of the topics, it's also a commercial one. If we don't step up, we are going to be left behind. And therefore, there is some regulation, but I do feel there's a lot of things that we as an industry, we can push forward. A lot of the regulation or the lawmakers are actually waiting for us to go and say, here's my proposal. This is what I intend to do and to push. And I do think that there is space for us in these kind of organizations to go and step up and make proposals, especially because when then the proposals come to you, they tend to not be very good. So then we have the know-how to move that forward, because otherwise we are just going to be behind. And with that, thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you.
I much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. That is certainly a lot of food for thought there, because it is certainly covering areas that I wouldn't have considered that you would cover in that talk. So thank you very much. There's a real lot to think about there, and I'll certainly be doing some thinking. Could we get the microphone, because we've got a question in the front row. I'm sure everyone else is thinking of their questions as well. So we'll come to Doug first. Thank you. He's just there. No, the other side. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So that was a very interesting talk. Thank you very much indeed. I'm involved in sustainability from a number of points of view. I provide consultancy to small businesses on 14001, so that's one area. Mm-hmm. I'm also involved in something called the Dark Skies Project in my part of the world down in the southeast. And one of the things that I didn't see you talking about was the light pollution, the effect of artificial light at night, something which our audiovisual industry can contribute to an awful lot in positive and negative ways. So is that something that you're including?
I would be honest, and you can let you, but I will be honest, when I came across, the truth is that I'm such an audio guy that I know nothing about lighting. So I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I cannot shy away from that, because I will fear the questions. But absolutely, totally valid. Yes.
Thanks for that. Fascinating again. And it's perhaps not a question, but I don't know if it's an observation or just a commentary really from myself. But for the past several years, I've been a judge on an industry award ceremony. And one of the questions that is asked of the various sort of entrances, what are your green credentials? And one of the common themes that I see is it tends to be, and it's probably no surprise, but it's the big, massive organisations that really don't answer that question seriously, and they don't put a lot of information in there. And it just begs the question whether, are they deliberately turning a blind eye to it? You know what I mean? It's interesting to hear, Doug, that you're involved in that. And I think, Rita, last night we were talking about sort of the Institute, and just one of the things I'd like to do as the new president is to look at ways that the Institute can promote ESG. And so that's something I'd like to perhaps discuss with you both and other people if anyone's interested. I don't know, maybe we can perhaps organise a committee or something and do some more work on
Yeah, and one of the things that I came across a number of times is that at least there is a pre-understanding or assumption that then becoming or adopting more sustainable practices means that it's just going to become more expensive. And therefore, people immediately backed off. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done that actually, in a lot of cases, it's going to be cheaper. And depending on what you're doing, and there are certain things that don't cost anything at all.
And I think another incentive is, and it's certainly, having worked for large multidisciplinary consultancies, it's one of the things that we look at in supply chains. And it's also things that we come up against when we're tendering for work. You have to demonstrate what your green credentials are. And it's, that in itself, in terms of winning business, should be an incentive. I mean, there are far greater ones, but that should be one. Yeah, thank you.
Could you hand the mic? Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Really nicely done. Kind of a little bit related to what Jim was asking there. I was curious as to if you had a forum where, if someone had an idea or a suggestion, where they would put that, and maybe that is something that's related to what your suggestion is. But do you have something within the company? I appreciate you're putting this from the L-Acoustics perspective. Do you have something internally where people can feed in ideas?
We do, and we actually have an entire department within the company that looks into sustainability. And it means that we, for the first time, I had to go and declare how many miles I do and ways of reducing distance and things like that. But that's an internal thing. I don't want to make assumptions, but I will suggest that ISCVE would be a good forum within the industry to provide that. Yes.
No, I think it would. I mean, I think some of the things that you're saying, I mean, like Class D amplifiers and so on from the years, obviously many people do that now.
Correct.
But you could be more innovative and say many people work from home. Maybe you supply an incentive for your staff to get solar panels when they work at home, as an example, and then you share that, and then other companies might choose to do the same.
Indeed, and on the particular topic of the amplifiers, one of the things that we removed because we had too much content is there are very clever power banking technologies. That means the amplifiers can store energy and then be able to deliver it much faster without. There are loads of technologies that exist that maybe aren't necessarily being promoted as sustainable or recorded, but the technologies are there. And yes, I agree.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Just ask one behind. Thank you.
Hello. So you guys mentioned about economic growth, also reducing e-waste. I was wondering, maybe this is more applicable to hi-fi world, but there's a lot of companies out there, they're making minimal electronic changes, but mainly focusing on cosmetic changes and like putting refresh products almost every year out to, obviously support their financial growth. I was wondering, what is your take on this, where, products being pushed out every year with minimal changes, just, basically more colors added to it, etc. But,
You have more experience with this.
Okay, thank you. I will hesitate to, I mean, you're asking for an opinion, and I really don't want to make judgments. Different companies have different reasons, and ultimately a lot of the job of companies is to feed the many families that depend on them, and therefore I can't blame anyone from making a phone that within 2 years is going to be obsolete. If we want to be more sustainable, we are going to have to use things longer most of the time. But in a way, it's very difficult to make a judgment. Overall, the different markets work in different ways, and think it depends on the conditions, I think.
So from John then, thank you.
Hello. Interesting talk.
Thank
you
you,
very
thank
much.
you.
There's one, I've been involved with amplifiers for over 40 years, and there's a simple thing that I think manufacturers can do: standardize power measurements.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so
Yes.
people quoting RMS, PMPO. We used to have a thing called the FTC, EIA. Why can't the Institute help standardize power measurements? And if you go to buy something that draws a lot of power, why can't we have energy markings? So, for example, you buy a washing machine, you've got A, B, C, D. I think this is the way forward.
Absolutely, and I am allowed to speak about this, and we are going online. So I'm going to speak a little bit, but there are a number of different initiatives from the consumer industry that have been imposed on the consumer industry because they came under the radar of the regulators, that we have escaped because we haven't been on the radar of the regulators, but no longer. And they are how much energy do you use, how efficient you are, how easy it is to repair, how long is the warranty, how much of that can be recycled. There are a number of different areas in which I believe as an industry, we can improve upon, yes. And I will double support your standardization of amplifier power measurement, yes. Absolutely, yes.
One other thing that I've noticed is that if you go for something that's a lot more sustainable, the costs go up.
Yes.
Therefore, there needs to be a lot more emphasis on the circular economy. So, for example, if you buy a piece of test equipment, say, for example, an audio precision, that's not going to be changed every year. What they do is improve the software.
Yes.
So we need to be at that point. Class D amplifiers are pretty much a common mainstay for amplifiers now, but you need to change software. Go for efficiency within the software itself on how that class D works.
The software topic is a very interesting one, especially in our industry, and this goes a bit outside of our talk, mostly because we are an industry, well, I believe that we are an industry that's very, very used to selling boxes, but our customers don't want to pay for software. So we subsidize the development of software in the cost of the box. And we've got to start getting our customers to get used to pay for the software, because a lot of the hardware manufacturers now have more software developers than hardware engineers in the R&D departments. But that's a separate thing. Well, actually, it's linked. When it comes to the increased cost of more complex equipment that is likely to last longer, I think that really also falls down into the topic I was saying about educating the market and trying to get into a circular economy, most definitely, but also in the trying to look at the cost whenever possible, because we are all under financial constraints all the time, but trying to look into, well, how much does it cost per year? So if you buy something that is going to be only going to be used for 1 year, it costs you 100, that's more expensive something that's going to cost you 200, but it will last 5 years. And trying to make that point to customers, sometimes it's difficult because they are under very strict constraints and under time pressures. but trying to think about the lifespan of the product or the installation or the thing, it is totally worthwhile, yes.
Well, thank you very much
Thank
again.
you for having us.
As you
Thank
can
you.
see, the interest that's come from that
No, it's
talk
good,
is,
yeah.
is exceptional. So thank you for the contributors as well at the end. Could we please give another round of applause?
Thank you.
please?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So it falls to me now to draw our day of seminars to a close and to say thank you to the people who've joined us online and to say thank you to each of our talkers. So that's Mark Fawkes, Jamie Angus Whiteoak, Rita Campos and Martin Bonsoir for what I think has been a really outstanding programme with a lot of diverse topics covered, and I'm certainly going to be driving down the motorway thinking about quite a lot this evening, so appreciate coming and putting yourself forward to do that. If any of you in the room have any ideas about the kind of talk you might like to give at ISCVEx 2026, which I can guarantee you is well underway with planning, please do come forward. You can come to Ros, you can reach out to myself, you can reach out to our President Jim, and we'll be all ears, as we should be in this industry, to hear the kind of topics that you want to talk about, because this is the members' event. So anything that you want to hear about or you want to talk about, this is your platform for that. I'd like to thank our AV crew who've been supporting us all day. If we could give them a round of applause, please. I would also obviously like to thank Ros and her people that help her, Sarah and Heidi, because the amount of effort and work that goes into producing something that looks so straightforward and seamless is absolutely immense. So can we give them a big round of applause, please? So the last thank you obviously goes to all of you for coming and attending and supporting your institute. It is your institute. It's what we all decide to make it together. So thank you for making the effort, and I do hope that we will see you at the next industry events that are coming up, and definitely at ISCVEx 2026. Thank you all very much, and safe travels. Thank you. Oh.